is called Dystopia Denied: Japan and the Destruction of the Outside Other. It's kind of playing into this constant trope within Japanese media of a fear of something outside of the national identity coming in and either disrupting order or destroying the populace or individuals. Before I begin, I'd like to do a quick acknowledgement, which is, as a consumer of dystopian fiction, I acknowledge nothing except the entropy of the universe and its slow crawl towards decay and non-existence. In that end, we are merely lumps of cellular matter in a constant state of disillusion, clinging to a rock that's hurtling towards a contemptible end where every presence is choice but a hollow parable to those who shall come after, mocking our self-righteous intent and base justifications while decrying what we have brought upon them. Get over this doom and gloom with a photo of a bunny. And now to be a bit more serious. I'm going to start by defining the timeline which I'm speaking. And that's every decade has a very exacting form of dystopian narrative reflected in societal discontent and socio-economic issues going on, which is in the 70s and 80s there was very little in the way of dystopian narrative because it was an unparalleled period of economic growth where national confidence at the highest point they've ever had, and they tried to deny anything going wrong. But I'll get into the fine details in a moment. In the 90s, we had a massive period of global economic crisis, several economic bubbles bursting in Japan, completely destroyed their national confidence. Anything to do with how they felt as a nation, how they felt economically as an international powerhouse was completely shattered. In period 2000 to 2010, we see what's called social ennui, which is a listless boredom feeling of the youth rejecting the parental concerns of the two previous generations, which were all work identity oriented. And in the present, it's pretty much, we've seen a rehashing of original tropes, a lot of recycling of older media forms, including retelling of narratives and remaking old series. So, in defining what is an outside other, we have a foreign influence, which normally in terms of Japanese media, especially anime, is normally parlayed towards the American as a negative. And that's all to do with the war. You know, the Americans came in, which people don't really know, in the late 1800s, American naval ships under Vice Admiral Perry sailed into Tokyo Harbor and said, if you do not open Japan to trade, we will bomb you. Like, we will destroy your capital. It is the original treaty at gunpoint. And that scarred the Japanese psyche entirely. But to counter that, any positive cultural effect from a foreign influence is always seen as European, French or German especially, occasionally English. But the Japanese view continental Europe as their allies and a positive influence. Then you have the alien, other, which is a literal alien, foreign alien, which is either extraterrestrial outside of Earth or a trans-dimensional being. These are most commonly seen in stuff like Neon Genesis Evangelion. And they've always come in to destroy the world, with Japan representing the world. And that is either a domination or destruction. It's a common thing you see in the American tropes of the Cold War sci-fi and things like that. It's a continuing echo of that. You have the supernatural, which is the most common. And supernatural was actually my original thesis base, cognitive dissonance and supernatural narrative in anime. And that has a massively long history in Japan, which I could devote 2-hour talks to, which I'm not going to bore you with. But it's basically anything spiritual, godlike, or demonic. Superpowered humans, which in Japan media is always called an esper, which is someone with telekinetic abilities or psychic abilities. And finally, you have postal transhuman, which includes anyone who is scientifically enhanced or completely altered, normally seeking revenge or to alter the normality of humans to become a permanently post-human state. So destroying what is standard society is today. And why is this topic so important? Within Japan, dystopian narrative really does echo, pretty a mirror image of any disquiet within society. And this is Celts, Bryce, heaps of academics talk about this at length. And it really does show the Japanese psyche of how they feel as a country within themselves and communities within this country, as well as how they view themselves against international background, especially a rapidly globalising thing. It's also, as I said, the weather vane of cultural issues, more niche groups, how individuals, how cities, how communities within cities or subcultures such as the goth, the metalheads, so on, view themselves against the larger Japanese society. And it also is just a good way to market. If you know what has come before, you know exactly where it's going to go next, if you trace these things from the past. Yeah. So where did it begin? On the left, Hiroshima. On the right, Nagasaki. Pretty much that had untold damage to the Japanese psyche in terms of how they feel as a nation, how they see the future. And from that we have what everyone knows, which is Godzilla. But during the 60s, the 70s and the 80s, where they had this really massive economic growth, they subverted the destruction into a positive state. The monster could be beaten by the superheroes, Power Rangers in our Western parts. So I'll just quickly go through the 90s. As I said earlier, it's a period of massive economic growth. Confidence was incredibly high within the Japanese nation. But they did produce two of the most important dystopian and post-apocalyptic narratives that still are relative in the media world today. The first is Akira. If people don't know Akira, I'll give a quick background. Tokyo is destroyed by a supernatural, superhuman entity. And in rebuilding that, it has fallen to an entropy decay of society where gangs led by Kaneda, this is the destruction of Tokyo by the entity called Akira. And you have Kaneda, who is the protagonist of the piece, is a street punk, lowest of the low, perpetuating this myth of the 80s of the outside influence being a negative. His closest friend has an encounter with a transhuman child who has been psychically enhanced, part of the Akira project, who transforms into a consumptive entity, which this is the later part of the film where his powers after rampaging have overtaken him and he's mutating rapidly. And this really reflects the time of society coming out of control, that technology has been developed in such a way that transhumanness is possible. And that's spoken more of in the 90s. The next one is North Korea's Valley of the Wind by Miyazaki, and this is one of my favourite films. Miyazaki is my current thesis topic. North Korea is all about a post-apocalyptic world after the 5 Days of Fire, where an unknown nation built robotic giants, techno-organic creatures, which destroyed the world in 5 days, leaving everything a toxic wasteland. Nausicaa, the girl in the figure, in the picture here, as the central protagonist, is trying to help repair the world and see the best way, and the Om, which is the insectoid creature next to her, acts as both antagonist and guardian figure who are repairing the earth, but are also a rampaging, almost berserk thing in their drive to repair the earth. And this is an informed narrative throughout Japanese media. It's the most influential film people have marked down. And parallel to this, at the same time, was another Japanese series we're going to talk about called Fist of the North Star, which is a Japanese version of Mad Max mixed with Bruce Lee. Like, people get punched, their heads explode, and it's all the brutal nature of a post-apocalyptic nuclear holocaust. So I'll move into the 90s now. Now, this is the biggest wave of dystopian narrative in Japanese media, and there's literally hundreds of anime and manga all about dystopian narratives and bleak futures and horror, gore, everything like that. One reason is because they had the economic collapse. It was called the Lost Decade because they felt the Japanese way was lost. Everything about Japan, what made it industrious, what made it brave and important on a global scale, completely shattered. And the economic loss led to a questioning of self in terms of our entire identity is based around a work social relationship. We exist only through our work. And then you bring in the usual to the global concern of the technosphere, which is technological and scientific advancement going so quickly with Moore's law of the rapid evolution of computers and other advancements, biotechnology and so forth, meaning that it's just really crushing on the psyche of self-identity. And again, it's Japan having to force themselves that they're not that important to the world. The world does not care about Japan as a whole. They love their products, they don't care about the people. And it's always been, and Australia's going through the same problem right now. And yes, this all leads to a massive flourishing of the narrative. The one everyone knows, the dystopian narrative, is Ghost in the Shell. We've had a few people mention it today already. Ghost in the Shell, in essence, is all about transhuman in a cyborg form. That this is the Major, who the entire film is questioning her humanity. Is she a person whose brain has been put into a cyborg body, or is she a completely constructed entity by the military? And it's called into question when she encounters the Puppet Master, which is an entirely cybernetic entity whose life comes about through the internet and communication. And this was amazing. This influenced so many other narratives in Japan, all about the notion of the human soul. What is the Japanese psyche in relation to their technology? So the construction of the Major. The next thing is with biotechnology. The term biotech is Godzilla is taken from a Sepultura song. I chose the example of Geno-Cyber originally because I thought that's what people would know, but then I realised no one's nerdy like I am and didn't get involved in the 90s. Geno-Cyber is a big thing about a construction of a biological entity as a weapon that starts off as a human child, but after exposure to stress, normally through the murder of a friend, it's an incredibly gory series, very short series, becomes this creature, the Geno-Cyber, which wrought destruction on a global scale. And this is the kind of concern of, this is a human being transformed into a machine. Before this scene, it was a normal woman who had the cybernetics within her, and to combat, and this is her unleashed. And this is the kind of fear generated within the media that humans can suddenly become a techno monstrosity, a bioweapon. And no matter how fanciful, this became a paranoia in Japan, that technology will invade the body, not just your life. And the really big one from the 90s, which I could spend 3 hours talking about this series alone. This is the landmarking Neon Genesis Evangelion. And this speaks to the other side of the other, which is isolation, that the person next to you is the intrinsic other. And the series in general is all about aliens called angels trying to destroy humanity through biblical prophecy. But it's all an allegory for the isolation of the central protagonist, which is Shinji Ikari here in the middle, who is isolated from his father, who is a megalomaniac. His mother is dead. He's never had good relationships with any other human being, and he sees himself as entirely isolated alone. The only time he can feel alive is in the Eva, which is the big beastie behind him, which is in a completely isolated space, battling the angels. Again, I could wax on about this for hours, but I won't. So we now move into called the Inui Incarnate, which is at 2010. I had a lot of choice to talk about here, but again, you have to be pretty nerdy to understand the series I'll talk about. So what marks this thing is the rejection by the Japanese youth of their parental forms of the work education cycles. Your entire identity is formed through what school you go to, cram schools, the force of education. You have no identity outside of, you study to go to university, you go to university to go to the corporate job, and you become the salary man, which is typical man, suit, tie, on the train, packed in. Massive rejection. There's also huge drop out of the educational process and the typical Japanese working environment, from full-time work to a more casual employment like we see in Australia. Again, it's also a great reliance on technology and social isolation. In Japan, even though they're still very paranoid about the internet, but here's a time where Japan had more home PCs and more people on the internet, on bulletin boards and websites, able to communicate across the country in a more rapid form, but using that as a way to isolate themselves. It's called hikimori, which is a shut-in, people who only live within their room, who will have no social contact outside their family or outside of their entire house. They will spend, to this point, there are people who have spent decades in their homes. They will never leave. They will have the food delivered, everything like that. Again, it's a strong dependence on material consumption. Here is, at the end of the 90s, the Japanese government and corporations started forcing policies that to recover the economy, we must force consumption. And to force consumption, you must start people on the notion that your identity is only formed through the brands that you have. It was at the time, the mobile phone technology was a big thing. The clothes brand, the music, your entire industries were formed around self-identity through the branding you have. And we've seen that in Australia, we see it in America, it's commonly talked about. And it's this basic feeling of this listless society, the Inuit, where they, after the 90s, they felt really directionless. No one knew what was going on, nothing felt secure, anything could fall apart at any moment. Japan didn't have the same confidence it had during the 80s. So Ergo Proxy, I found, is a good example of that. Ergo Proxy is set in a post-apocalyptic world where humanity is just dying out slowly. And in the course of that, the character, Ray, is questioning what these creatures are called the proxy, which are a new human, which are genetically developed, the usual trope, who are pushing in and destroying the human notion at the same time. Cyborg and androids are becoming more human rational, and they're the primary carers of the humans as they fall into decay. And the series pretty much ends the notion that humans can't pull themselves, after a certain point, can't pull themselves out of the entropy of decay. So we now move into the present. And this is a return to the question of Japanese exceptionalism that we saw before. The government, especially, we've seen in the last few weeks, Shinzo Abe, the current Prime Minister of Japan, is trying to change the constitution to make them more proactive in the world, more aggressive, be able to defend themselves, station troops elsewhere. It's a direct response to Japan and North Korea. And there's something to question what the other is. The other can no longer be an outsider. Fukushima demonstrated this, a nuclear disaster. That how did it happen? It couldn't have been a foreign entity doing it. It must be our own fault. And again, it's part of the recurring environmental concerns. It's a big part of the narrative these days. And like, the fear of China invading, coming in, North Korea bombing them, back to the Stone Age. Part of that is seen in Psychopaths, which talk about the deviant of the other, that anything that's not normative in society is chemically controlled, and those who can't be chemically controlled are locked away. Everyone going through a major city centre in this series has their brain and emotion scanned, and if they don't meet a certain criteria, they are automatically arrested by people like him, which is Shinya. It's a very interesting series, very good notion of what constructs a human identity. And the antagonist of the series is a man who normalises violence so much that he can't be registered as a deviant, because it's perfectly natural to him. And the big one is Attack on Titan, which is all about extinction through another, where humanity in a fantasy world has been forced to live in a single city which is separated by class. And outside the city are creatures called Titans, which are gigantic monsters who eat humans for pleasure, not for survival. Basically immortal. This is the Colossal Titan and the protagonist series after he destroyed the wall. And it is this complete fear that there is no hope, that these creatures will eventually destroy and come in. Right, so it's a Titan eating a human. I could have gotten something really gory for this scene, but I decided to spare everyone. Okay, so in the conclusion of like, what can be drawn from the idea of this paper is, where is the fear in Japan, and can this be parlayed into a larger global scale, as well as where can you be traced the media trends? Like, how do you know where the next big media hit? Can you predict the next big media hit in Japan? Is dystopian narrative in Japanese media a constant? Will it always be there? Who knows the answer? And for more information, please check out my blog.